What's up, everybody?
Hello, hello.
Hello, as always.
My norm.
Your norm. So we back again up in here. Mel and me.
Indeed.
Mel and me back here for another podcast. Got something to talk about today.
Yes.
Right? And so we're going to call this episode, as we get into it, we're going to call it Show Me the Money. Show me the money. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Show us the money.
Show it to me.
I guess this is about episode 32. And
33.
No, I think it's 32. Well, we have some previous episodes that I didn't assign a number to, and I think it was more so because it was like a vlog or something like that. And we weren't sitting in front of the podcast set. I kind of have this mental thing going where if we're not sitting, like, it's a podcast when you're sitting on the sofa and you're having a conversation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I say stuff like that a lot, and I gotta focus on that. And a lot of times it's because we're having just that personal conversation, just casual conversation and stuff, and it happens to be in front of the camera where we occasionally turn out to the audience and that sort of thing. So I guess I have to continue to hone that skill. Mm-hmm. But back up in here, we want folks to show us the money, right?
Yes, please.
But first, and we'll get into what's behind that particular title in a second. Mm-hmm. But the first thing that we want to take, because we were kind of following this whole thing, and there was some discussion last week about it with the second Soweto Derby meeting, in Johannesburg, and of course this week there's a lot of soccer going on over there, with the AFRICON, a couple of nations going, and you got NEDBANK that was mentioned to us, the NEDBANK Cup, which I just want to take and just kind of give a shout out and to those Pirates fans out there and other soccer club fans. Don't get too upset about this,
right?
Because we learned a lot with this NEDBANK thing.
Yeah.
And so shouts out to the Khosi Nation, man. We saw
the highlights. It was fun.
we're gonna show everybody love. So we're not gonna get caught up in the arch rivalry and stuff like that. We're gonna leave that to you guys over there, because again, I want to stress that we're from the U.S. We're Americans. We love all of South Africa, and we're not going to get swept up in that. We're gonna keep it all in fun.
We just enjoy the games.
We're gonna keep it all in fun, and we're always very excited for you guys and what's going on over there. We were following we got a chance to catch the highlights because we couldn't catch it live.
Yeah.
Now they show some of the couple of nations live streams and stuff, but as far as the NEDBANK Cup, we got a chance to catch the highlights of it and listen to some of the commentary around that. There's actually a streaming channel that I found that showed up in the algorithm, iDisc TV, and we'll just go ahead and post a link to them up here. So shouts out to iDisc ITV. And I got to tell you that analyst that in which again you can link to the video and actually go check out the video of the post commentary and stuff. And I have to say, and we from the United States, and we have seen legends when it comes to sports analysis and commentary. I mean, I go all the way back to when I was a little boy, Howard Cosell, and others as well. Local people like Harry Carey and those types of things. When it came to baseball, Jack Brickhouse. And then we have modern legends as well, right? Marv Albert, who's still alive, who does all the NBA stuff. Bill Walton, who's now passed. When it comes to the NBA, so we have legends. But I got to tell you, this dude on iDisc ITV that was giving that commentary and analysis post game, I have never seen any individual with the level of energy and passion that dude. I mean, you could tell he eats, sleeps, and breathes.
He did. Yes.
I think it's probably Chiefs stuff for the most part.
Yeah.
But I just got to give it up to him.
The level that he broke it down, I was like, wow.
Yeah. So it made it very very enjoyable.
Yeah.
To really appreciate that rivalry that exists between. I mean, of course, we know they have a rivalry, but I'm telling you, to get a chance to see that and how passionate he was about just the entire situation with, and I had no idea that it's been 10 years since the Chiefs won that
trophy.
cup.
Yeah,
that cup.
Yeah.
And so that's why we just want to salute the Chiefs, because we got a chance to see up close and personal, and even online, we get a chance to hear and see people express their passion for various clubs and stuff. But you know, the Khosi Nation, man, they are a special breed, and that's a good point that the brother was making on that streamcast. You know, and it helps us as outsiders, as foreigners, to truly appreciate and grow into a deeper appreciation for that whole thing from a cultural perspective, as we plant our feet, you know, and come to understand the people there and the different things that are important to them.
And I appreciated him breaking down, because it then allowed me to be able to understand the game even more, because I mean he was very detailed. I mean, even just to behind the different dynamics and everything.
From an organizational perspective and stuff like that. Yeah, so check that out, man. And also, you know, back along the lines of what I was saying, you know, we're outsiders, and yet here we are sitting on our podcast talking, you know, about South African soccer and those inner dynamics, right, that they understand, you know, very well, right? It's second nature to them, but to us as outsiders, it's very fascinating.
Yes.
And so other people who are outsiders who take in our podcast, our content, right, maybe that gives them some intellectual curiosity about it, and then they go seek out. I mean, I even learned about, you know, it allowed me to delve into deeper, well, because they played at Moses Madiba Stadium, right? You know, I can never get it right. I'm going to get it right, whether it's Madiba or Mabhida. We'll get it right, so forgive us for that. But you know, I learned a bit about him, you know, who he was, you know, as an activist and politician, and the role that he played in the South African apartheid struggle, right? You know, so it's little things like that I think sometimes we overlook, and we get so caught up in a lot of the petty things that are down here that we
miss the important stuff.
That we miss the opportunity to realize all the little other things that we get along the way, right? And taking the time to genuinely connect with each other and learn about each other and have these discussions like we're going to have in a few minutes, you know, around what's behind this particular video. And it came, and let's just go ahead and get into it. It came out of our last video that we did, you know, is AKON for real with this kind of thing. It was talking about the AKON and the statement that he made around, you know, white South Africans as opposed to black South Africans, where he made the statement of basically white folks are living in the hood, black folks are living good. That's the way he stated it, right? And so we began to dissect that and what it really meant. And you know, it turned out to be a pretty popular video, you know, for people. We had some commentary and views and stuff on it, and there were a couple commenters in particular that made comments that kind of inspired me to say, okay, you know, we need to talk about this a little bit deeper, because they internalize it. I think, you know, they kind of internalized it in a manner that was less than desirable from my perspective. I think they kind of misread my point a little bit. One person in particular made a comment. They even accused me or us black Americans, because that's the sexy thing nowadays, right? That's a popular thing that I guess we're all supposed to be fighting each other. And that ain't my thing. I don't have time for that. I'm too old and too mature for that. But you know, they basically accused us of trying to sow division between AKON, you know, being, I guess, more African than we are. You know, he's Senegalese, you know, by lineage or whatever. And, you know, and between him and South Africans. And it's anything but that. And my whole thing was, in response to that, what do we really have to gain by that? You know?
We was just simply commenting on and stating facts about what he said.
That's provided the footage and everything.
Nothing else.
So, you know, but it's I'm not going to let that sour me or anything like that, because what that does, that gives us an opportunity. Like I challenge that individual. Let's just go ahead and put it all out on the table, because I think that's what we should do more with each other. If we have claims and statements or feelings or whatever, put it all out there. Let's discuss it. You know, let's be mature about things. You know, because the way I see it, there's a bigger end goal. That's in mind, and that's at stake. Much bigger things at stake for us as people, a global people, right? So I'm not going to be swept up and caught up into a lot of the petty stuff. Let's just be real and genuine about stuff, and let's talk about it. So that's simple.
Exactly.
Right. So anyway, but the other thing that happened was I had a particular commenter that what they did was they conflated what it was that we covered. They distorted the whole point that was made, and that was what AKON said about white folks living in the hood.
Right.
In other words, where they live, where they are relegated to the spaces as far as occupying, to live and stuff like that. It wasn't about how much wealth they actually have.
Right.
But what this particular commenter did was they spun the argument into a totally different direction and started talking about the wealth that whites hold as opposed to blacks.
Which was different.
Which is a different thing altogether. But since they did that, I challenged them, and then I told them that we're going to do an episode on this because that gives us an opportunity to really sit down amongst ourselves and in front of the people and share a bunch of information. And by the way, this is going to be a lot of facts and figures for this particular episode. And we're going to do stuff like flash stuff on the screen, as we discuss certain things so that people can reference and they can look at these hard numbers, as we speak them, right? So let's get into the specific claim that they made. And I'm going to quote their actual quote. And this is quote unquote, right? So they basically said in terms of wealth in South Africa that blacks got more than white South Africans. That's what they said. In terms of wealth in South Africa, blacks got more than white South Africans. And when I heard that, my first thing was like, whoa.
Right.
Because we clearly know, everyone knows, and that's a rhetorical flourish in and of itself. But it's a known fact, known documented fact, that there's tremendous wealth disparity in South Africa between the small percentage of whites and those of the larger percentage of blacks, which make up approximately 80% of the population of South Africa due to the apartheid system.
Exactly.
That is a known historical present
not
fact.
Something we just coming up with.
Will never change. Right.
Can't be disputed.
So what they did was they couched it in terms of the JSE or the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, right? And what that basically looks at, and again, I don't know to what level our audience cares about things like the Johannesburg Stock Exchange or the New York Stock Exchange or in the United States or the Nikkei in Japan. But for those who don't know, understand, or care about those things, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to kind of spin it and place it more in layman's terms or basic terms as well, because this individual, I'm not sure how much they suspected that we understood about things like the stock market and investing and stuff like that, because some of the terms that they were using, it all looked good and sounded good and stuff, and that's fine. But we happen to know a little bit about investing in the stock market because we are investors, right? We are. So we're gonna go ahead and get into that. So what they said about the JSE or the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and by the way, just to go back to detour back real quick, I'm looking to invest on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange ourselves, right? We're looking to that. The only reason that we haven't to this point is because we're still trying to get comfortable with the banking situation there. And we're going to talk about an issue that we've been dealing with recently the past couple of weeks on an upcoming episode. That'll be very interesting.
Yes.
But, just becoming comfortable with the banking situation and knowing that we can put investments into that area and be able to secure those equities on that side through the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and not have any problems, with our bank account as foreigners that we have over there and that sort of thing.
Right.
So that's the only reason that we haven't, purchased equities on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange ourselves to this point. But in the future we will, as we continue to learn more about companies over there that we want to invest in. So that's fine. But so back to their point. They cited the JSE, in which they stated that the ownership of the JSE, in other words, the percentage of people that own interests or are invested into companies that are traded on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, kind of break down into a 30% share for black people, a 20% share of whites, 50% share they cited as being held by multinational corporations. So again, we got 100%. They said that 30% of the JSE, right? And there's what they refer to as the market cap of the JSE, 1.3 trillion US dollars. Right. Okay, US dollars, 1.3 trillion. Out of that 1.3 trillion, they stated that blacks possess 30% of that 1.3 trillion. Whites have a smaller percentage on the surface of 20%. And then the remaining 50% is owned by multinational corporations. Now, let's just look at that right there. Just stop right there. You got 100%. Okay? 30%, 20%, and 50%. Okay? We know that South Africa has a broader population than just blacks and whites.
Right.
Okay, so if we just go on that statement alone, how do you account for the colored population and the Indian Asian population, right? Yes. Okay, are they not invested in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange as well? Do they hold equities there?
Right.
Of course they do.
Right.
So that statement in and of itself on its face is inaccurate because you are not taking into account those other people. What
you have to take all races into account.
Right. But we're gonna give them those numbers. Okay? We're gonna give them that. We're gonna say 30%, 20%, and the balance being 50%. Okay. And they went on to say that because of that, it only appears that that white South Africans are richer. It only appears so because of their smaller numbers, meaning their population percentage. They comprise 7 to 8% of of the South African population, which they may be going down a little bit lower with because Trump important. He's sending a plane over there for the white folks to come to the United States. They are chartering a plane. I read that story today. They are chartering a plane, United States, to give them refugee status. That's the first time I've ever heard or seen that.
Right.
That being the case, right? If you're a refugee, typically people are fleeing someplace with the clothes on their back and the little money they have in their pocket. They're crossing borders on foot and hopping on boats, and they're not expecting it. But they're sending a chauffeur, for folks.
Right.
It is what it is. We're not gonna spin off and get into that. We're just stating this fact because that's the fact. But anyway, 7 to 8%. Okay, so they say that makes it appear, because there's so few of them. But then my counter to that is that very much makes the point. Right. And we're going to explain and we're going to show exactly how. Let's just use an example of 100,000 Rand. We're going to put it in South African currency terms, right? Let's just say the JSE is worth 100,000 Rand, right? Okay. So broken down by percentage, that means that those multinational corporations would have 50,000 Rand. Right. They would have 50,000 Rand share, right? The balance of that would be 30,000 Rand would be possessed by black South Africans. And 20,000 Rand would be possessed by white South Africans. Right. Now let's look at those numbers. In and of itself, those numbers are fairly close to each other. 20 to 30 is not very much difference. You're talking 10,000 Rand difference. Okay. Now let's look at those percentages. Okay. You have 1/7 of the people is holding that 20,000 Rand. Right. So in other words, you have 7 times the number of people in this pot over here sitting on this that's got to divide up and share this 30,000 Rand. Whereas you have one person, put it in terms of if you say families, right? We're one family, you and me. Okay. If we had 20,000 Rand to our name that we possess as well, and then we got a whole group over here of 14 other families. That's splitting up 30,000 Rand. Right. Okay.
Each person is going to get
about 2,100 Rand. So now let's break out each of those 14 families. Right. Right. Because that equates to 7 times, the number. Right.
Doing that, we're going to get 10,000.
10,000 apiece. So if you divide it up between the two of us, but we're looking at families.
Right. So we got families. 20.
So we got 20K. Okay. Now that 14. So for every one of us, there's 14 other families. Exactly. And that's what those numbers equate to when you look at white to black.
Which means the percentage is going to be even smaller now.
So now you got 14 families. Each one of those have 2,100 Rand. Take this family standing next to us. You got 2,100 Rand, 2,100 Rand. Okay. We have 20,000. Right. Let's push them off to the side and pull the next family up. You got 2,100 Rand. We still got our 20,000.
Right.
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 Same thing. You go across those 14 families. Right. So that clearly displays the wealth disparity.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so we're going to even push it out further and present it in another way toward the end of the episode, right? And so that's the reality, right? We would have in that scenario 10 times the wealth, personal wealth as a family, as every single black family that steps up and stands alongside us.
Exactly.
That is the honest to God truth.
Those are the numbers.
Those are the numbers, right? So, and along with that, like I just said, they went on to state, they provided a number that said that they made the claim that, by the way, black South Africans are the richest. They have more wealth than all other blacks across the entire continent of Africa. And they offered the number of 400 billion US dollars.
Okay.
So, in other words, those black South Africans, right, who were supposedly, as they claim, doing better than white South Africans, have more wealth than white South Africans, right? They got 400 billion. So that they claim there is that they're big balling. They big ballers, right? The black South Africans are big ballers.
Right.
Okay. And when you compare them to the entire continent, that's Nigeria, Tanzania, Kenya, Senegal, Ghana, Ethiopia, Somalia, all of them. The blacks in South Africa are the richest ones out of them all at 400 billion. Now, when I researched, I found that number is actually higher than 400 billion, and we're going to give them that. It's actually around 658 billion is what it is. But we're going to come back to that in a second, right, to bring this point home. Okay? So they have, 400 billion based upon the JSE. Now, the other thing is that it's not fair to base wealth on simply the JSE, because when you compare them to other nations in Africa, not everybody has assets on the JSE.
Exactly. They have other assets.
They don't, not other countries, their people don't have like their retirement accounts and pensions and stuff like that invested in companies traded on the JSE.
Exactly.
They may be trading on some other stock market or some other mechanisms that they have in their country, right? So before we get into breaking down what actually encompasses wealth, the individual wrapped it up by basically saying, hey man, AKON is not looking at this from a mainstream media point of view. He's looking at it from an accounting and economics point of view. And I wasn't quite sure if that was supposedly a jab at me or us. It's like, hey man, he's got it together. You don't know what you're talking about. He's not letting the mainstream, that's sexy too, right? The mainstream media, it's always good to beat up the boogeyman mainstream media, saying, the mainstream media got you brainwashed, and whatever they tell you, you just eat up and suck it up and all that kind of stuff. We ain't them type of people.
Not at all.
Right?
That's not what I got from what he said.
We see the mainstream media for exactly what it is. No matter what country they are a part of, right?
Exactly.
So we believe in education and those sorts of things. We're not just going to take what the mainstream media or anybody else tells us at face value, right?
Not at all.
So they're looking at from an accounting and an economics point of view. So let's do just that.
Right.
Let's do just that. So let's talk about what comprises wealth in people, okay? Because it is not limited to just the stock market, right? So what are the types of things that determines a person's or family's wealth?
It could be, you can own land, you can have your own businesses, or in addition to stocks and bonds, even cash.
The amount of cash that you hold.
The amount of cash.
Like they all talk about back in the day how grandmama kept all the money under the mattress, stuffed in the mattresses.
Real estate.
Real
estate is a big one.
Property and land, right? Real estate, a house, apartment buildings, whatever you own that you may have somebody renting, letting. You may be letting to somebody else, and that you have cash flow coming in from that, right?
Absolutely.
So the various revenue streams, many things make up what provides for a person or a family's wealth, right? So to simply use something like the JSE as a standard, or the NYSE or whatever, is not an accurate way of representing a person's wealth. Although we just established that when you consider just the JSE alone, the holdings there's still a huge disparity if you use that alone to determine wealth, right?
Right.
Okay. So, business ownership, money that you make from that. And the other thing that's kind of intangible, I think, is when you look at economic opportunity. Right, your ability to secure funds and money and the connections that you have and other people that you are connected to, your networks. You know, as we say, one of the things something that was told to me when I was a young dude that has always stuck with me is that your network is your net worth.
Yes.
Right? So the people that you know and what they can do for you and who they can connect you with, the opportunities that they can lead you to, has a lot to do with your financial success, right? So, you know, those are some of the things that comprises wealth. So when you say wealth, you have to, and if we just look at that alone, we look at the fact that of the land disparity, which is which is at the core of a lot of the stuff that's going on between the United States and South Africa is centered around those lands, right?
And what I discovered is Black South Africans, they only own about 4% of the farmland.
Is that what it is?
4%. And of the urban plots, it's about maybe 30%, whereas with whites, it's 40%. So, I mean, just that small percentage, only 4%, you know, with farmland, that's a huge disparity in itself as well.
Yeah, my understanding is overall land ownership still exists somewhere about 70% or greater. In the hands of white South Africans. So that's just you know, those again the facts. And again, if we're off, you know, by a percentage or whatever, you know, hey, feel free to chime in and provide the source when you do so, because but that's all the sources that I've researched over this time has spoken to about 70% or greater of land ownership still in the hands there.
Right.
So with that, let's just, so that we are clear about, as we move forward in this discussion or get further into it, is that this is not about black, as far as black people are concerned, about black progress. Because just as in the United States, we understand that we have had some progress, you know, as people. Same thing in South Africa, right? So this is not, you know, to our South African family out there, it is not to downplay any strides that black people are making there, because we see it when we're on the ground there. When we go out, we see the progress of black people. But at the same time, we must acknowledge the truth and the figures around as far as where there's still disparities there, and that's what we speak to. We are merely speaking to the percentages and the facts and figures around that, and providing the sources. And so, you know, they have what's called the UBPL, or the Upper Bound Poverty Line Statistics, as gathered by an organization over there called Statistics South Africa, right? And they track the poverty numbers, and it's based upon census data and other sources, right? But they are the authority on it, and they have determined that when it comes to poverty in Africa, in other words, the wealth disparity, the wealth comparison between racial groups across South Africa, they have determined or established a number of 64.2%, okay, of blacks that fall below that UBPL, or the Upward Bound Poverty Line. 64.2%. Okay. The colored population. Okay, and black Americans, hold your shit, okay, as they like to say. Colored is really a thing over there. Okay. That number equates to about 41% of the colored population falls below the UBPL, or the poverty line. So right now we have about 64.2% of the black population fall below that line. And then 41% of the colored population, excuse me. Let's talk about the Indian Asian population. That number is 6%. Okay? 6%. For the white population that fall below the UBPL, based 1%. On Statistics South Africa, is a meager 1%. So now, let's just put blacks and whites. Let's just isolate those two, because that's what the discussion is about, right? Exactly. And this is not that we're discounting the other populations. This is for ease of discussion. 64.2% black,
1%
white. Poverty figures. Okay. Further broken down into children only. Those percentages are for the UBPL 74% black children as opposed to 1.4% white children. Those are the facts and the figures. Okay. So that's staggering.
Very.
You think?
Very
and
staggering.
Again, you're a social worker. This
Yes.
is your area of expertise.
Yes.
You're concerned about those types of things, right?
Absolutely. But then too, what comes into play with that is what I also researched is it's the types of jobs that Black South Africans have. They'll have them mainly in agriculture and I think they said
service is a big
they
thing.
called it private household.
Private household.
Private
care?
household is how it was titled. Whereas you have the white South Africans, they have them in mining and utilities. Those professions pay more.
Mining, utilities, law,
all of that pays more. So that's why their annual household income for a family, you got the white Africans at nearly 700,000 rand versus the Black South Africans at about 150,000 rand. So again, a huge disparity. And again, that's because of the different fields that they are
present in.
Yes, that they're presently employed in, and it, obviously there's barriers and stuff to the reasons why behind that. So this is why we have these type of numbers is leading to that.
Okay. All right. Whew. So with white household wealth in total, I went and I looked up the number. Okay. And that number actually, the total white household wealth in South Africa is recorded to be about 19.3 trillion rand. So just over 19 trillion rand. What that equates to in US dollars, because that's what the initial claim was, spoken in US. They said Black South Africans 400 billion, which we actually determined is actually about 650 something billion, almost 660 billion US dollars. Well, white South Africans possess 336 billion US dollars in total household wealth. Okay. Now let's go back and revisit those numbers. Let's look at the claim that was made by the individual that when they said that Black South Africans, they actually got more wealth than all of the South Africans.
Right.
So we're going to give them that 658 billion. We're going to use a higher number that we found in the research. 658 billion US dollars held by Black South Africans. Awesome. That's great.
Right.
We're going to go with that. We want it higher, right?
Absolutely.
Because we know that it needs to be higher. It should be higher, right? Justifiably so. But and hopefully in the future, as we continue to move through this 21st century, this progress, we're going to be beyond that. Yes. So we're gonna, as they say, claim it into existence, or speak it into existence, as people say. But we're gonna go with that 658 billion. Now, white South Africans 336 billion. Okay. Now I got to tell you the numbers when you compare South Africa, the black wealth held there, compared to the second country that was behind it. Huge difference. It was like I forget. It was some ridiculous number. I forget, but it was a huge distance between South Africa and the second country that was behind it. So again, but it's going to help place this into perspective. If white people have 336 billion US in wealth,
and they only represent 7%.
Exactly. To Black South Africans who have 658 billion, and that's bigger than everybody else across the entire country. Continent. Sorry. You take that small 7% of the white South African population. What that means is white South Africans possess more wealth per capita than every other black family or person across the entire continent. That's deductive reasoning. That has to be the case because if the disparity is huge, it's larger than Black South Africans, and they got over half of the wealth, right, of the remaining 80% of the population And if that 80% of the population's wealth towers over the wealth of all the other blacks across the African continent,
yes,
that goes to show you, and that proves that white South Africans are richer than all of the black people across the entire African continent.
Strictly based off the numbers.
That's just the truth. That is the truth.
Yeah.
And that, to me, blew my mind.
Yeah.
And that person, by making that statement, exposed that fact. And I never even looked at it that way, because
I didn't either.
I've never even considered South Africa compared to, like, say, other African nations when it comes to wealth.
And they did say South Africa is the wealthiest.
Yeah, so they said that they use that as part of the argument, saying that, hey, man, the black folks in South Africa, they doing so, absolutely. They doing so good, they doing better than all the other black Africans across the entire continent.
But if you really dig deep into it and really break it down and dissect it, then not so much so when you compare it against the white South Africans.
Absolutely. So those are the facts and figures.
Yes.
And that's what we wanted to discuss. We wanted to really get into it and just, challenge and share the information, because that's our goal here. Our conclusion and aim, out here, we can let everybody else do all the, the fighting and stuff like that with all the around the petty stuff. But in terms of us and how we move forward in our journey, like I say a lot, we want to be educated. We want to understand, and we want to bring other people along, and we want to help. We want to serve as a catalyst and be a vehicle to kind of cut through some of the garbage,
misinformation and stuff. Because I think if it's not dispelled and it just continues to be perpetuated from one person to the next, then people take it as truth, and it's not. So I just think it's upon those of us who decide to get on to do a podcast or to be on television, or if you're communicating to any masses, that you need to be speaking factual. If that means doing the research, not just going off what someone else says, but doing the research so that you can present facts when you're stating something. So that's my big thing.
Well, I mean, we'll do our part, and like I say, it's nothing. It has nothing absolutely to do with sowing division between anybody. Again, we have nothing to prove and nothing to gain. We just two people, trying to enjoy our time over there, and ultimately, make it over there and do some things that we want to do based upon our vision and what we see is being contributory, when that time comes, and that's it. And in the process, we want to learn as much as we can, connect with the people, learn the culture, appreciate the culture, because that if you're going to find yourself in that, immersed in that at some point, then you gotta know. And there are people who are gonna come behind us, and so that's our goal, man. And that's pretty much it. We kicked around some facts. Hopefully the folks will receive that, and we don't have a problem being challenged on it. Continue to educate us if you have any information. But expect that we like to have conversation, especially me.
Yes.
So if you say something, I'm gonna come back, and if I find something in it, just like you find something in mine, hey, let's challenge and educate each other, man. And it's no big deal, man. At the end of the day, we all have a destination that we want to get to. And having said that, at the end of the day, it's
Mel
and me, and this has been the podcast. Peace.
Hello.